word did cleave the darkness. At thy speaking, it was done. For created light, we thank thee. Thine ordered seasons run.
Hey, good morning, everybody. We are excited to be back again this week with a chance to talk about what is happening in church life and ministry life. I'm Leah Abel, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm a DCE by trade and by training, and then now I do a lot of events and meeting planning stuff, and have just become a part of a bunch of leaders that are kind of trying to talk about how do we decide what church looks like next as we move forward. And today we are specifically going to talk more about returning not just to worship, but what does it look like to deal with the events that we're used to doing, those ongoing things that we do, Vacation Bible School, retreats, voters meetings, those kind of things. And when we make the tough decisions to cancel, convert the event, or postpone it. And I am joined by two of my favorite people, Pastor Dan Weber and DCE Cassie Schermbeck. Thank you guys for being here this morning. So I asked these two to join me, one because they're people that who I really respect in ministry and the way they serve. And also they each really offer a different perspective, I think, serving in different kinds of congregations, serving in different states, and serving in different seats. Dan is a senior pastor and Cassie's a DCE on a kind of medium to large size staff. And so let's just start by you guys kind of telling us a little bit about yourselves, kind of where you serve, what your context is, and what you're doing in the season of COVID. Dan, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Dan Weber. I'm a lead pastor here at St. Luke's Lutheran Church in Federal Way, Washington, kind of Seattle, Tacoma area. We have a medium-sized church. We've got about 450 folks on a normal weekend, whatever normal, if you remember normal. We've got an associate pastor on staff, a full-time deaconess, ministry partner, director of operations, part-time accountant, couple admins, but that's basically it. We don't have a full-time most positions. We don't have a full-time worship person or a children's person or anything like that. So we're in the kind of pagan Northwest where, the faith is not ingrained in our culture. And right now, the culture I'm in is probably like a lot of places where it's just super political. You've got a lot of people who are angry with government restrictions, and you've got a lot of people who are still very afraid of their well-being. And so that's kind of the tenor right now. And also people are just tired. That's my context right now. People are tired looking at screens. People are tired of being home with their kids and their families. Yeah. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
All right, Cassie, tell us about you and your context and what ministry looks like for you.
All right. My name is Cassie Schermbeck. I'm a DCE at Our Father Lutheran Church in Centennial, which is a suburb of Denver. And my title there is Director of Faith Development. And I joke that I'm in middle management because we have a lead pastor and an executive pastor who's my supervisor. And then I get to supervise several other people who do amazing work. And I don't take the credit for it, but they're the ones who do like the real work. I get to work with adult ed, which I'm learning to just absolutely love. And I work with women's ministry because I'm the female commissioned minister on staff. So that's, that
becomes your job.
It makes sense that that's assigned to me. And then we do have a part-time kids ministry director who is a commissioned DCE, and she's fantastic. And we have a director of student life. And then we also have a preschool that's fairly large. And so I get to work with them as well. We have a staff of about 40 to run that preschool, which is officially on summer break right now anyway, which is brand new within the last couple of days, which helps out a lot with decision making. But we're working really hard about that right now. So COVID ministry for me has been a lot of producing content for people to consume on screens and realizing how tired of that people are. A couple of Zoom meetings every day. And some days feeling like, man, I worked really hard today. And other days feeling like how did I spend 8 hours in front of a computer and I think I accomplished 1 hour worth of actual work? I have 2 kids who've been doing school at home, and it's really hard to do ministry and planning and dreaming in 5-minute chunks in between 5th grade math help and 3rd grade math help, and reconnecting this kid who got kicked off of this Google Classroom meeting. So I've been living that parent work from home, half homeschool with guided help life that a lot of our members are too.
Yeah. So if you've watched any of these other webinars, you know that one of the things we've been saying a lot is that key to this kind of period of ministry is really about making intentional decisions. Like, let's say, what are we going to do? What matters to us? What are our priorities? And one of my big battle cry things. So I'm a planner and a people person. Like that's who I am, and also what I actually do for a living. And so this has been obviously, complicating for that. Inability to plan and difficulty in connecting because, like, as Cassie said, and I think most of us experienced, a little tired of screens. And so one of the things we've talked a lot about is not just what decisions do we have to make and let's quick make a decision, but how do we decide now how we'll make a decision for later? Because some of the decisions that we're going to talk about today that some of us are facing might be for events in the fall. They might be for events in winter even of 2020 or 2021. But how do we make decisions now and set up kind of thought processes to help us do those things, well? And so just a couple things I want to share with you before we kind of launch into some more conversation. And I'm so grateful to have Dan and Cassie and their real life perspective. One of the other reasons that I asked these two is that I know they won't let me get away with something that's not really real. They'll call me out. And so that's why they're here. You guys are here to be a filter of reality. Okay. So here's just a couple thoughts before we kind of get into this more and talk about this idea of decisions on cancel, convert, or postpone events. Well, the first one really is deciding how to decide. This week I heard this quote, and the person who quoted it said, "I can't find the attribution for it. I've searched and searched, I can't find it either." But it really rang true for me. And it was this idea that having a process takes the pressure off the person. And I don't know about the seat that you're sitting in today, but I have felt a ton of pressure in this season to kind of to know what to do, to make decisions, to feel confident that I'm doing the right thing. And I really was struck by this idea of if we set up a process and we decide how we're going to decide, we decide what's important, that's what we're going to decide, it really takes the pressure off kind of that sense of I have to do this thing. I don't know, Dan and Cassie, how does that thought resonate with you, that quote?
I wish I had it more in place than I do. So even kind of reflecting on this last few days of, I realize I didn't have a plan or a process for how we're going to make a lot of decisions that I was super conscious of. But as I've been reflecting on how did we make these decisions, it's been like really affirming of, oh, I had these filters in place. I just didn't name them ahead of time. Right.
So even just recognizing, hey, I do have some filters. I do have some things that are helping me to make decisions, even if I didn't do like Leah would do and put it on a spreadsheet, because you know how I love me a spreadsheet. What thoughts from you, Cassie?
I had been thinking what we needed were principles to take the pressure off the person.
Yeah.
And when we tried that, we realized each individual event is so unique that my idea of having some guiding principles in place to help us make decisions wasn't really helpful. So hopefully the process and the priorities and defining and like ranking that will help more. Because when we realize that we can't just have a list of principles that we use as opposed to a process, and we were making every decision like one-on-one, it's a lot of pressure because you can't keep everybody happy, and including yourself, knowing that you're making the best decision possible.
Yeah. And even that recognition, because for me, that idea of like, here, what are some key principles for us? That's awesome. But then how do you say, okay, man, this really fits with these principles, but it doesn't over here? Or it fits with this ministry, but it doesn't seem like it fits over here. So how do you develop that filter so that you can move it around and use it? And it is a part of a process, right?
The process could help us not talk it to death.
Yeah. So here'd be my kind of 3 pieces with decision process. One is, how are you going to decide? So that goes to some of the filters that we've already talked about. If you've didn't watch some of the previous webinars, I think it was webinar 1 and 2. I did a big kind of chunk on how do you do, what is a decision-making process. I gave like some, kind of a little freebie. Here's a handout you could use to like run a meeting and kind of figure some of those things out. So that stuff's already out there. Go find it, or go ask somebody else. But how do you decide? What are your principles? What are your priorities? What are your timelines? All those kind of pieces. And then the other question I think that's big is who decides? And then what are your specific context and community considerations? So just kind of, so briefly, just want to walk through those. With the how to decide, the one big one, and Cassie pointed to this, I think, with her comment about principles, is what are your priorities? And I think it's key to say, as we make decisions about how to operate in this period of ministry, which does look different than what we're used to, and maybe is different than 6 months from now. We all are still not sure about that. But for this period of time, what are our priorities in making decisions? And so to be really honest about those and to battle those out a little bit, I think is huge. And then to work yourself through some if-then scenarios on that as well. Say, so if we do this, then we'll do this. If this happens, then we'll do this. If the government says this, we'll do this. If our board of directors says this, then we'll go here. And to work yourself through those. I've been affectionately calling that brain dumping lately as opposed to brainstorming. Because if you're, I think a lot of us are finding ourselves waking up and like we're reworking the same maybe decision or logistical, like something that's stuck, like, and we're working it over and over again in our heads. But to get it all out and say, what are the options? And then what are some kind of mind map, but what are some if-then scenarios? I think for some of that, how to decide is key. So a lot more that can be said about that, but just some thinking there. And then the other big one, I think, and again, Cassie, you pointed to this, who's deciding? Is it the two people that are connected to that event? Is it the board of elders? Is it, do you have a senior pastor who's like making all the choices, whatever that is? But two pieces of that. One, whose input are you getting? Cassie, you mentioned something earlier about, maybe it was before the call started actually, but about, so we're trying to make some decisions about Vacation Bible School, for instance, and what that looks like. So how, what kind of input do we do? What kind of survey do we do for that? I think that's huge. So whose input is important for those decisions? And maybe that's for big picture decisions, but also as you're looking at individual pieces, who do you need to talk to? Is it key volunteers? Is it parents? Is it your board of elders? Is it whatever? And then the last piece, who makes the call? I think, is it the person who's in the event committee? Is it their call to decide we're doing this, we're not doing this? Is it the board of directors? Is it staff? But getting some clarity on that, because I think there's a lot of potential, and I don't know what your experience has been with this, but one thing I've worried about a bit in this time is I think there's a lot of potential for not just political separation, as you mentioned, Dan, but within congregations, like some real breakdown of stuff. And so deciding who's deciding and how they're deciding so you can communicate that stuff well. I think those are all kind of key pieces as we think about decision process. Any thoughts on that, stuff that rings true for you guys in that, or stuff that you're kind of like, Abel's wrong?
I got lots of, I could talk about that last slide for an hour and a half.
Yeah, tell me more about that. Because you're sitting in the senior pastor spot.
Yes.
So that work for you?
My context is I'm in the senior pastor side. We've got a smallish staff to begin with, and lots of staff is furloughed right now anyway. So it's real quiet here in the office. And so for me, and this is also my personality in a lot of ways, but I think in my context, this is a time for me as the lead, like leaders lead. And so I'm trying to go first and help steer the conversation and not just react to stuff. And so I'm often starting with, well, let me say this. I'm living in like the question of why, asking why and articulating why. Whatever the event or decision we're making, I'm trying to be very, very clear and expressive of whatever I think is a good course. Here are all the whys along the way. Here's why I'm thinking this. Here's why I'm not thinking this. Here's I thought this, but this. And so being very transparent with my thinking and the rationale, especially as it relates to our mission. And so I'm kind of presenting my whys, and based on those, we come to maybe this possible course, and then hearing feedback with the relevant, whether it's a staff member or the board. But I tend to not be a big survey kind of person, because I've seen that set up a lot. When you vote, it feels like winners and losers. I voted for the other option and I lost. And so I don't do a lot of surveys. I try to listen to people and connect pastorally, just give care and attentiveness to people, not just collecting data, but trying to get a sense of where are people, and then based on that to kind of make at least a mental proposal, articulate my whys, get feedback, adjust from there. Maybe that's really fast, but that's kind of my process right now.
That's awesome. That's good stuff.
It's helpful for me to hear thinking about post-COVID ministry. And, you know, I always have this mindset of after any event, rethinking it and what went well that we can do even better. Or is this the best way to accomplish that purpose? And so the way I try to get feedback from that, I'm going to take what you just said into consideration for the rest of my life, like this way beyond COVID. That's super helpful for me.
Yeah. See, this is why Dan, because he's just so smart. I do one other piece, kind of the third one. So how do you decide who to decide? And then the last piece, or one more piece anyway, is your individual context and your community considerations. Because, you know, we're all in different spots. You know, Dan, can you maybe say a little bit about well, actually, let me share this first, and then I'll have you say a little bit more about what your local context looks like, and then Cassie, share yours. But what are some local requirements that you're facing as you make that decision? And then also, what are the local concerns? Because I think some of the key concerns might look different in different spots, you know, in small towns, or big towns, or different states and whatnot. And then the last one, and I'm sure I could get burned on this one from some folks, but what are your neighbors doing? I think matters in this situation, because I think it gives you a picture of what your community's expectations might be. So what are the churches around you doing? Have conversations with those folks, and just find out, like, hey, so what are you doing? What are you thinking about? And then also, what are local businesses doing? Because I've heard several folks that I've talked to say, hey, so restaurants are starting to do this, or you know, gyms are starting to do this, and so we're trying to decide, what do we do? And it might be that you say we want to be different than the businesses around us, or it might be, hey, how does that inform us about the expectations of the folks in our community? So Dan, share maybe a little bit, if you would, about what does your local context look like, and how is that going to affect decision making for you?
Yeah, so our state, I'm in Washington, we've got 4 different phases the governor has outlined, and each phase is very, very specific about what we can do and can't do. And it's very specific, kind of different industries. So right now we basically, we're officially closed as a church. We have at least 2 more weeks until we can have any kind of gathering of 50 persons or less. And even then, they can't be at risk, and at risk includes anybody who's over 65. So it's a huge part of our congregation. So we're still a month and a half away from normalcy. One nice thing that takes a lot of the mental effort out of this is because of the directives from the government, whether you agree with them or not, it's very clear. Here's what you can do, and here's what you can't do. And so my kind of decision process is starting with, what do we want to do? Like, what's the why? What are we trying to accomplish as a church? Is it how do we do that legally? How do we do that safely? How do we do that in a way that's good for our people? And then kind of, do we have the capacity to do that?
Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Cassie, context wise, for some of those kind of local expectations and requirements?
Here in Colorado, we're a little behind where you guys are. You guys are really leading the way, you know, for us, I think for the whole country in a lot of ways. But we like shut down kind of early. So we're getting healthier kind of early compared to some parts of the country, which is nice too. So as a state, we have 3 phases, and we moved from stay at home to safer at home a couple of weeks ago. But we are in the Denver metro area, which was a hot spot. And so we were in one of those many large cities where the state guidelines were more free than the local guidelines. And we really haven't had any pushback from that as a church that I know of. I might just not be the one getting it. But we could be having gatherings of up to 10. But 10 is not really a helpful number for us. Like, there's not a whole lot that happens that's 10, and it's not super worth it considering what we would have to do to disinfect and sanitize a space. So we're not doing much on site at all right now. And we don't know when we're going to move to phase 3, which is protect your neighbor. We assumed it would be 50 instead of 10, and instead it's based purely on your ability to distance. So that's hard because we don't know how to measure. Like if you have a family of one sitting in a pew, 6 feet apart from that is really different than a family of 6.
Mhm.
So those are the kinds of decisions we're looking at right now, is how can we take those, whatever the more conservative guideline is, city or state, and make it work in our space.
Mhm.
So that's where we're at right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So the consideration of what that looks like, and it's interesting too to watch, I think, what some businesses are doing to think differently and say, hey, what could we do to meet a need in our context that's a little different. I really would like to hear more from the two of you about what are the decisions you're facing right now when it comes to event stuff. Do we cancel it? Do we convert it? Do we postpone it? What are some of those decisions you're facing right now, and what's kind of on your list of filters for deciding on that? Cassie, would you maybe share like some of the stuff that you're kind of looking at right now? What are we?
The most scary one for us right now is Vacation Bible School as an event goes, just because it's an event where we normally have 200 plus 50 volunteers. We know we can't do that. We've already both postponed it and converted it, which I think is good. But even at that, we're not making super concrete plans because we don't know what will be allowed by then or what will be smart or safe or responsible or caring. It's not just what's allowed, it's what's caring. So we don't know that yet. And we know we don't know. So we have some plans, but it's more if-then scenarios. And realizing there's a limit to how many if-then scenarios it's worth talking through.
Yep.
So that's one. We've got some postponed retreats. We're trying to decide if they are postponed or canceled. We have a high school mission trip that is definitely converted. What we don't know is it converting to something you do on your own or in a very small group, or something that we all do together locally? Is that more than one day? We don't know that yet. We have an adult mission trip that's definitely skipping a year. So those are some of the big decisions we're working on right now.
So as you're doing that, what are your filters? What are you thinking through? So you said care. I heard you say caring. What's caring? What's legal?
Yeah.
What are some of your other filters that you're looking at in that?
We're really looking at safety first. And then I think purpose second. Like, how can we fulfill this purpose differently or later, or does it meet our purpose as a church if we skip this event for a year, if it's an annual event?
Right. How about you, Dan? I mean, I know you've already said you're kind of like, it's kind of July before anything's happening, but what kind of stuff are you looking at for those decisions?
Yeah, so my filters, I'm loving this time for ministry, as hard as it is. I mean, it's horrible. I'm sick of screens. I'm sick of not seeing people. So there's much I hate about this. But in terms of big picture ministry, I'm loving it because for us, I kind of use the word suspended. Like, everything's suspended. Like we've suspended on-site things. We haven't canceled things. We're not closed, but we've suspended a number of things, and it's allowing us to really look at why we're doing things. And I keep thinking of Jesus' words that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And I think sometimes in ministry, we get in this mode where we're serving our programs. They're not serving us. That because we've always done VBS, we're supposed to do VBS. And VBS becomes the goal rather than VBS as a tool towards some children's or family discipleship goal. Mm-hmm. And so this time has allowed our congregation just to look fresh at the things we would have been doing that we've been forced to suspend. Now, I'm not the bad guy for canceling some particular ministry, but it gives us a chance to say, well, why would we do that anyway, or in the best of times? Yeah. And so for us, the very first thing is the why. Like, how does this help us accomplish the mission that God has given to us in our context? How is this shaping disciples of God's people and reaching lost people? And then as we look at adapting, modifying, postponing, canceling, those kinds of questions, I think safety is the very next one. If we want to do something like, we actually blew up VBS a couple of years ago, and we went to like a bunch of summer camps model, which has been awesome, and I love it. And I feel like really poised well for this right now. But even then, we got to roll with what we're doing. We work through the why. How do we do that safely? and kids don't distance well, and you can't trust them to maintain boundaries. And so we're looking at things like, all right, well, the goal here is not just to put on a camp. We want to help families and children grow in discipleship. So what if we change the model that families come with their kids, and so parents or grandparents are actually kind of on site working with the kids and doing the activities in a social distance kind of setting. Anyway, so we're wrestling through, why do we want to do this? How do we do it safely? After safely, or kind of at the same time, just asking, where are our people at emotionally, mentally, recognizing people are tired, and trying to tap into a sensitivity of what the needs are. And that's been a huge filter for us right now. Even like worship wise, we're recognizing our people are tired of watching an hour-long church service at home and sitting on the couch. And so we've had a bunch of conversations this week of, I think we're going to move to like a 30-minute kind of service, not to water it down, but just to recognize 9 weeks into this, if people are still putting in 20, 30 minutes on the couch to watch a service, that's pretty good commitment. Like they're invested at that point. And so why imply that you need to watch an hour by providing a full hour? Yeah. So where our people are at is a big thing. One more thought before I forget it. Also, just recognizing people are lonely and isolated. Sounds obvious, but okay, what do we want to do about that? So we've created a new couple of random events. This one was 2 weeks ago, one is this week, where we did a drive-through Chick-fil-A night here on campus.
Cool.
So we talked to the mayor's office, talked to the police department, everything's fine. Neighbors didn't need to call the police. We had a kind of an online sign-up sheet. So we had 4 cars in our parking lot every 5 minutes going to 2 different pickup spots. And so we had a tray with the bag of Chick-fil-A. So we didn't have any contact. We didn't have any touch, but people drove by the church. They haven't been to church for a while. And so just coming on campus felt good, and seeing the staff felt good. And we had signs, and we were waving, and we're doing the same thing with donuts on Memorial Day or this Sunday. People are signing up. Come by. Here's 2 free donuts. Come say hi. Come at your right time. And so it's allowed us to say, one of our values is life together and being gathered as people. We can't do that how we want to, but what can we do? How can we do that safely?
Dan, one of the things I love about you, that I've always loved about you, I'm going somewhere. But one of the things that I always love about you is you're a thoughtful person who makes decisions, like intentional decisions. And I just really am grateful for that kind of leadership to say, where are people at? What are we going to do? I know you don't take compliments, so I'll just try. Okay. Saw your little thumbs up. But what are we going to do? Why are we going to do it? Where are people at? I love that. And I love that filter of, okay, this is an opportunity to say what matters most for us for our energy that we're expending as a staff and as volunteers. What matters most to actually completing the mission, not what have we done. Like there's freedom in that. There's freedom in that. And I think so many of us have felt paralyzed in certain areas to be able to free that up and say, okay, how am I going to still do the mission of God? As opposed to either I have to do a live event or I have a Zoom call. Like there are other options, Yeah,
I work in the notes I wrote preparing for this. I wrote the word freedom probably 12 different times, bold, underlined. Like to me, it's just a great time to live in the freedom that we have in Christ, and to model that and articulate that, as I say, like the why, where we're talking through our processes, to share with my board or my staff. Look, I love the Apostles' Creed. I love confession and absolution. Are we able to worship Jesus and hear his word and not have every possible element in our worship service? Recognize where people are. We're free in Christ.
I love that. Well, I want to walk through kind of those 3 decision points of, are you going to cancel it or skip it? Are you going to convert it? Or are you going to postpone it? Just kind of talk a little bit about how you might think through those choices a little bit. Just give you some filters. I think I've said this a lot of times, but I'm not really into telling people what to do, which might be surprising to some of you who know and love me. I'm not really into advice giving as much as saying, hey, here's some principles, maybe to use your word, Cassie, or here's some filters to use to help you think through, like, what's the process that you can use to maybe make some of those decisions. And so some of these I've heard from Dan and Cassie already and what they just shared, but what are some of those filters that you're using as you make calls on, are we going to cancel it, convert it, postpone it? First one is, what are your congregational priorities? What's the why? And maybe that's your why all the time, your big mission statement. Maybe it's something that you sat down and said, okay, during this time, during this season, however long it is, these are the priorities. We're going to put top priority is, what are we doing for for our online visitors, or maybe your top priority is letting people know that they're not alone, or maybe your top priority as a congregation is I don't know, something else. But whatever those priorities are, to kind of set those and live by those as a filter. The next one, of course, being safety as key. What's safe to do? And that is probably the stickiest, I think, as you kind of look at the political pieces of that and just the sense of safety that people feel. But how can you be responsible and be caring, as Cassie said so well? And then I would say your next one is, what are the event goals? Whether that's Vacation Bible School or a retreat or some big, movie night that you were planning. What was the point of that in the first place? What was the why of the event? And can you still meet those goals, or have the goals shifted a little bit? I'll say more about that in a little while. What are your community and context needs? So the needs of your community, there's also the requirements, obviously legally, but what do you really see around you as far as people's needs? And then as Cassie and I kind of went back and forth with an email this week, she was really lifted this one up for me in a way that I think I knew in the back of my head, but wasn't thinking about clearly. What's the capacity for your staff, your volunteers, and your calendar? Cassie, would you say more about that? You made a comment to me about not being able to do 9 months of ministry in 3 months that I thought was really insightful.
That was my fear immediately, because our calendar is full, and I've never worked at a church where the calendar wasn't full. And I feel like we're always kind of at capacity. So if we're postponing anything, you're making some really intentional choices, whether you realize it or not, because you can't postpone everything, and you can't postpone everything that was worth doing or scheduling in the first place, because you can't pull all of that off, like whatever we missed during this time period, plus whatever was going to happen before the next calendar year rolls over and those events would happen again. You can't do it. And it's not even just your church calendar capacity or your staff and volunteers, but members too, because church is not the only part of their life that's been suspended. So they're postponing vacations and family time and projects where they couldn't get the supplies they needed, and their work goals. And so that's a huge piece that's hard to measure, but has to be taken into consideration.
Yeah. But I love that. And to me, as I kind of thought about that too, I was thinking, how does that tie into your congregational priorities? Like, we're going to say anything that meets this goal or whatever, that's where we're going to focus. Or we're going to say we're going to do one thing really well every week, or whatever it is. But to set those things for yourself, I think both to give your staff and your leaders a filter, but also to be able to tell people. Because I'll tell you, sitting on the other side of not being on a specific staff right now, although I serve with lots of different staffs, it's interesting sometimes to watch from the outside and wonder, well, why did that thing get canceled? I don't understand, because there's not an explanation to me. And I want that. Not because I'm mad, I think people are being evil, but help me understand. Help me understand your choice to do this and not do that. Help me understand from a standpoint of saying, hey, we're not doing this, but that's because we really want to put our energy into this thing over here. Like, that's what I want to hear, because I said to a few people, how teenagers say a lot in youth group, that sometimes I wish that Jesus was just here, she was just physical. And I know that he's real, but he doesn't feel real because I can't touch him and see him. And for me, church has moved to that realm. I know my church still exists. I know my church is real, but right now it doesn't feel real because I can't touch it and I can't see it. And so, and I don't mean the building, by the way, but there's a real reality to that. And so being included in some way with kind of communication of what are we doing and why, because then it's what are we doing and why, as opposed to, well, we decided, kind of a thing. I don't know, does that make any sense as a semi-outsider?
It makes sense. And it makes me think that it's because part of church is connection and community. And what's easy to convert is content to consume. It's just easier to convert than community distance. And I think we all jumped to online connection to try to be community. And it's different because it's really almost more of a visible reminder of absence than a visible reminder of presence. And so that's just harder to convert. And I think that's why it doesn't feel real right now.
Yeah. Well, let's walk through any other filters you guys would add to that. I think we kind of captured most of them from your earlier ones, but anything else you'd add? Say, make sure you're thinking about this as far as filters.
I think it's a great time to try something. Is there something you've wanted to do, and even what's the what would, even if you can't execute that exact idea, was there something behind that you wanted to do, and is there a way in this setting to do that? And maybe there are ongoing things like our associate pastor Aaron. We trying to really help the youth connect. That's an obvious thing. We've got youth group. That's an obvious thing. They have Zoom meetings. But he put in tons of work last week and pulled off like a murder mystery night with Zoom and using different rooms, and kids had to go explore and figure something out. But again, the idea was, all right, we want to help people connect. We want to try this. And how do we do that in this setting? And so starting with that end in mind and then just adapting our context to that has been fun for ministry.
I love that. So is there something new that we wanted to try that we can go after because this season gives us a chance? I love that, Dan. Just some thoughts on cancel. These would just be some basic filters I would offer. When should you maybe cancel and say this is the right choice? Okay, well, you can't do it safely. Cancel it. That's pretty clear, right? If the event isn't as planned, so it's not face-to-face or doesn't involve high touch, it doesn't meet our goals. So if it doesn't meet the goals, if you're not face-to-face, then just give yourself an out and cancel that event. The next one would be, this event seems out of place or maybe tone deaf in light of world circumstances. I was struck this week. I was listening to an NPR radio station kind of conversation, and they're doing their fund drive right now, which I thought, yikes, that seems a little rough. But one of the things that they do that I think is interesting is usually they give like swag. If you give this much, you can get this swag, or you can win this trip, or you can whatever. And I loved that what they're doing this time is if you give at, X level that they were trying to get people to give at, we will feed a Colorado family for a week. That was their add-on. And I thought that is, to your point earlier, Dan, that is listening to needs. Because if they were going to be like, I'm going to send you a swag bag, I'd be like, I don't care about a swag bag right now. I don't care about winning a trip. I can't go on it anyway. And so I think if the event seems out of place, or maybe somehow self-serving in a strange way, a little tone deaf, I would say now's probably not the time. Like, let it go. Let it go for now. The next one would be if you don't have a team that's able to put in the time to convert it. If conversion is going to be so much work and time, your team can't do it. Volunteers, whatever, maybe it's a time to let it go. And then Cassie mentioned this one to me. She said, I don't like the word cancel as much. Cassie, do you want to say more about that?
Yeah. Like if you love one event and someone else's event that they love got postponed, but yours got canceled, it just feels like you're the loser, like you said earlier, and I prefer thinking of something where you just skip a year, like right. We just have a longer time period between these two, when these two things happen than normal, because you're not canceling something forever. Now, if it's a one-time event, that's different. But if it's an annual event, I think skipping a year just sounds nicer. But I think it's because language reflects culture, but it also guides and shapes it. So that's part of my deal.
Yeah, it's helpful. And I think in the case where this is really an annual thing, and you say, hey, we're going to skip it this year, but it doesn't mean we're not going to do it. I think an interesting place to think about that is, say, a summer mission trip. Hey, we can't do this. We can't do our summer mission trip because it was, on a plane to, Africa or something. So we're not going to do that this year, but we're going to do it next year. Now, that's not necessarily skipping a year, but it's saying it's going to look different, but it's just not, now's not the time kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's huge. And then there's the other side of me that says, let's not pretend that we're, that we're not canceling it.
Yeah,
just be honest, be brutal.
If we say about everything, that's what'll happen.
That's true. I like to be brutal, don't I? I appreciate Katie put a comment over here on the YouTube live that said, my senior pastor wants me to make the call on our youth group camp and VBS by myself. I don't know how to make this decision or even if I should be making that decision. Katie, can I just start by saying you should not make this kind of decision by yourself, period. Okay, now, and what I mean by that is you need to get some other folks involved in that conversation. Maybe it's some key volunteers. Maybe it's your senior pastor. Now, you might have to make the decision in the end. It might have to be your call, but you need to get some input. Cassie and Dan, any other thoughts for Katie on that?
Yeah, in my notes earlier, I talked about kind of leaders lead, and I try to make a proposal with what I think is a good course of plan. I take it to my team, and then make the call. And then when this is me as leader, if something goes well, I want to share the credit with the team, and if something goes poorly, that's my fault as the leader. And I think that's really important for leaders. And so Katie, maybe you are in a position, maybe you're closest to the situation to say, you know what, I do think we should or shouldn't do this. I haven't talked to the parents and the families about it. Maybe it's like the decision might be yours, but I would say to my pastor, this is a big church program, and I think it would be helpful for us as a church if you made that announcement to say, we as a staff have decided that this is the call. So maybe it is your call, but I think a good leader is going to own that decision and kind of cover your back on that, so to speak. So that I, as pastor, I want to trust my team, but if my youth pastor says we shouldn't do youth group, and there's parents who have concerns about that, then they can talk to me as the lead pastor to say, no, I've talked to Aaron and the team, and this is why we made the decision, as opposed to creating a system that there's a scapegoat. Eighth commandment, I would hope to put the best construction on things that he's not looking for an out. I think my best construction on what you commented is, maybe he recognizes you are the best informed person and he needs your input. Yeah. But I would hope that because it's such an emotional and central program in so many churches, that the lead pastor could own the decision, even if you were his primary advisor on that.
And I want to be sensitive to our time a little bit, Katie, and everybody else listening, and say, your only decisions are not binary. It's not have it or cancel it. There's other ones as well. So let's kind of walk through this next piece of when might postpone be the right call. So I'd say postpone might be the right call if you can find an appropriate later date for the event, an event that makes sense, or a date that makes sense. Postpone might be your right call if the event has to be face-to-face, if it's a high-touch event, and it has to be that in order to meet its goals, and you can do that. Maybe it's an event where it's okay if it waits. Timing matters less than having the event itself. Maybe that makes postpone an okay thing to do. And then the last one I'd offer, and I'm going to share these slides as well on Church Next Week and pull some of these things out, is to say that a postponement gives the time necessary to make accommodations, because probably it can't look just like you initially planned it, right? And so that might be where postpone makes a whole lot of sense. Because I don't think there's a whole lot in the next couple months that's going to look just the way you initially had planned it, unless you're planning a Zoom vacation Bible school already, because you're so ahead of the times. You're amazing. All right, let's talk quickly about Convert. And I think Convert is probably, it's an area that I think I get the most excited about right now, because to your point, Dan, we have this opportunity right now to say, what can we do differently? So here's just some considerations, I think, about whether or not an event is worth converting. The first one that I would say is, does hosting a converted event meet a right now need in your community? So one of the examples that I would use for that is Vacation Bible School. I think in the past, the felt need of folks has been kids are bored and parents are going crazy. So that's why maybe they're sending their kids to VBS, and spiritual growth. That does matter, but it's maybe not the only thing on the parent list, right? So they're saying, normally VBS is all about, curing boredom and spiritual development. Right now, VBS is not about curing boredom. VBS is about a need to deal with isolation that our kids are feeling. And it's about spiritual development. So there's tons of ideas going on out there about Vacation Bible School and ways to do things. One friend that I was talking to, she's trying to make this call, and she said, one of the things on the table, and I'm not suggesting this is what you should do, but it's a thing on the table, was, what if we can have a VBS that's mostly a virtual thing, but then every night that week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we bring a different grade level and we do an outdoor game night with crafts, because we can manage 20 kids. And so you still have that in-person chance for them to be together. Maybe it looks different, but looking at that, does it meet a need that's right now? Does it deal with some of the isolation? And is it possible to do that? So that's an option, or maybe a reason you might consider a converted event. A second one that I would say for converting is, if accommodations that you can make do make the live event possible, then do it. If you can. That's always the thing, right? If you can you pull it off with accommodations and it matters, to go for it. The next one I would say is, can you provide options? Because I think the reality we have to be aware of is people's comfort level is really different. Some people are ready to be on site and some people are not, or in, 5 months they're going to be, or 5 weeks they're going to be ready to be on site, or they're not. And so the question is, can you provide options? Can you do something that's all virtual and something that's on site as well? I know that's a big undertaking. And one thing I would throw out there to you, and please email me if it's something you want to talk about more, is that don't make a mistake of having the same leader running both the on-site and the virtual event, because you really have two audiences. And there are really kind of some cool ways to engage the virtual audience and be personal for them. But somebody has to be personal for them. It can't be the same person who's being personal for on-site. So if you're able to provide options that are on-site and virtual, that might be a reason to convert. And then another reason to convert might be if you're able to add some personal, tangible touches. So there's a big difference for me between getting an email thank you and a handwritten thank you note. Giant difference. I think one way, Cassie, you talked about this quite a bit, about kind of the sending out content. I am tired of my phone. I'm tired of my screen a little bit. And so if you can send me something tangible, I was on a webinar the other day for like production companies that are doing these live events. And they talked about, the swag bag you get at a live event, like mail them a swag bag. Okay. Put it in the mail, spend the money and send it. Something tangible, something that feels personal is just huge. Just a huge piece. So I'd say if you can provide something beyond just the screen, even if it's small, I think that's huge. Like you have something to say.
I do. I have an example and a point. I think that you need more than 2 leaders for that, because if the virtual event is going to be more than content that you just watch, you have to have some kind of moderator, and you can make it interactive at least somehow. And we're going to actually do that in just a second. So you can talk about that and then like point out what we're doing behind the scenes. Cause like, I don't know how to do that well, and I'm learning right now. But also we are doing Flat Jesus over the summer for our Sunday school kids. And, we talked about just emailing it. Like, you can just print it. You don't need us to do anything. And I said, nobody's going to print it. Nobody's going to do that. So we, printed it and laminated it and mailed it home. And it gives you that tangible, like, now I'll actually do this. Like, Flat Jesus is going to learn to cook mac and cheese with me and my 6-year-old while he stands on a chair or whatever. So yeah. And took your advice.
And beyond, nobody's going to do it, Cassie. That says that you cared enough to take 5 minutes and do that. Because I'll be honest, like, I felt a little disconnected from some of my friendships too, because they feel like so like far away. And so when someone sends you something or delivers something to your house, like even if it's, anything, there's something about that says, oh, you aren't just like on a screen, you do actually exist. Like, this is real. Tangible matters. I mean, hello, communion, Jesus seemed to get something about tangible mattering, right? Absolutely. I see John Paulus has got a great comment over here as well. Great DCE from Colorado. How are you experiencing mental burnout with your volunteers? After in-home schooling, Zoom meetings, etc., they seem to be overwhelmed with making more adjustments. Wow, so true. They're pivoting everything in their life. And now we're saying, hey, we want you to help us pivot VBS. They're like, right? Thoughts on that, Cassie, from your perspective?
I think that's where I have to be willing to postpone or cancel or skip, because I don't want to not do anything that I had previously committed to. I feel like I'm not fulfilling my call if I don't provide adult Bible study. But I can't convert everything. And I'll just be honest, as a parent, I have zero interest in online VBS. I'm not even as a DCE. Like, as a DCE, I think the purpose is clearly spiritual education, and it's never about babysitting or boredom, ever. But as a parent, like, I cannot moderate one more online thing for my kids. I can't, even if I'm just setting it up, I just can't do it. So if that means that we skip a year, I'd rather do that. So I just have to be willing, even though I don't want to, I think.
Yeah. And I think I would say too, to John's question about, volunteers feeling overwhelmed, I think to treat them like, I care about you as a person. How are you? How can I care about you? not just what can you help me do. And so if they have a sense of purpose, because I think some folks as volunteers are at home feeling a little bit like, I'm feeling a little purposeless, or I'm feeling a little like I'm wandering in the wilderness and I don't know what to do. And so a little purpose feels really good. If you have folks that are like, I don't think I can do that. Awesome. Say, hey, could you bake cookies with your kids maybe instead and go deliver them to Edna, who hasn't gotten to leave her house in 3 months? Have them do something that feels purposeful and filling, and checking in on those things that feel purposeful and filling, I think, is huge.
Yeah, a couple of things we're doing for volunteers is handwritten thank you notes every week. If somebody's serving, they're getting a thank you note from a staff member, handwritten in the mail. And I'm trying to give my volunteers every out possible. So right now, one of the things we're doing personal touch-wise is we're calling on our members. A lot of churches are going through the directory and calling. I'm really proud to announce, by the way, we've made over 2,000 phone calls since this started.
Cool.
And so I've got a team of callers, but every single week when I send them the name of the people to call, I say, hey, if this is your last week, great. Thank you for serving. If last week was your last week, that's fine too. No pressure. I want you to be well. And so not every church service has to be a lifetime sentence. And so to give our volunteers an out where they feel like they're not quitting or disappointing us, I think will actually allow them to serve longer and healthier, knowing that they're cared for and that they're not stuck.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, let's walk through. There's 2 more pieces that I kind of want to throw out there as far as converting events. And just some things to kind of keep in mind. And I've said this 1,000 times in the last hour, but I'm going to say it again. Revisit your goals. What were the goals of the event? Or what might your goals be now in light of COVID? Keep those at the front all the time. That, again, I've said this also a lot of times, but things that you were doing poorly before, you probably are more obvious, but maybe you weren't good at keeping your goals front and center before. Well, now it's more obvious. And so keep those at the front. Use this as an opportunity to grow. Second one, recognize the right now needs you're needing. Maybe not the needs, again, that you intended, but what are the right now needs that you're meeting? Second one, 2 leaders, or as Cassie said, maybe you need to think more than 2. 2 leaders for 2 audiences if you're going with hybrid events. Don't let the virtual folks be an afterthought. There are really, the more of the stuff that I'm doing, because I'm looking at even larger events like education conferences for districts and things that are all the way up to fall. And I don't just want to sign up for a conference where I just sit there. There really are ways to treat people as if they matter. So have two leaders for 2 audiences or more. Add personal, tangible, high-touch elements, which I think we talked about. And then this is an Andy Stanley quote that Adam has used on this webinar a couple of times that I think is great. Andy Stanley says, do for one what you wish you could do for all. And his thing behind that is to say sometimes we don't do certain things because we want to be fair. And if we can't do it for everybody, we shouldn't do it. And I've seen a couple of folks, a DCE in Nebraska, actually, that I know, who I watched him do some deliveries to volunteers with his kids, like a thank you gift volunteer. And his name is Peter Bay, so shout out Peter Bay. And one thing that I loved about that is, I know Peter couldn't necessarily go to 200 volunteers' houses, right? And so we could say, well, if you can't do it for everybody, you just shouldn't do it. But he did it for one. Do that special thing. And Andy Stanley has a lot more behind that, than just this, pay off someone's mortgage or something. Do that for one as a church, and you can't do it for everybody. But think about that. What can you do that's personal and caring instead of saddling yourself with, if I do this for one, I have to do it for everybody. Is there a senior that's graduating that you really are connected to that you need to go above and beyond as a thank you gift or as a graduation gift for, even if you can't do it for everybody? So just a thought. And then also I'm going to put on my other hat a little bit of a project manager. So one of the really not super exciting but necessary things that I've done during this COVID period is work on some of my certifications for project management. And it's interesting to me how it's got me thinking about things that matter in terms of ministry, because pretty much all of the projects that I do are ministry projects. And suddenly there we go. There's kind of 2 lenses that are just a part of every project management process. And one is risk assessment is always a part of what you do in project management. And I think definitely this season has probably brought that to the forefront, that we maybe aren't always the best at that as the church. Or maybe we recognize the risk, but we don't set up a risk response plan. This might be a time to really kind of be aware of that. So when you think about various programs that you might do or events that you might have and say, okay, and you go through that what if scenario. So what if, I saw someone post on Facebook today, what if we have in-person worship and then the next day or week we find out that someone who was in worship with us was COVID positive? What's our response plan? So thinking through things like that. And then the second one, the second piece is documentation is a big part of project management as well. Documentation of your processes and procedures. I don't necessarily mean document everything that you did during COVID and type it up and write it down. What I mean instead is right now might be the time to say, hey, what is my plan for when we usually do VBS? How could I put that on paper to pass that off? I would like to do another shout out to DCE Ruth Furr, who used to be, so I followed her, like she was an intern and I came the next year and did like a part-time gig at the church where she was. And one thing that Ruth did really well was like the Easter breakfast was like a 2-page document that I could follow and do. It was like amazing. And the person who I was reporting to was like, I don't know, she just did some stuff. And then I find this document, which is like amazing. So I just would encourage maybe this period has kind of lifted up the importance of that for me. Is this a time when you can document stuff? Like, what are the key leaders in VBS? Have you written down what they do? Do you have like job descriptions, stuff like that? And again, also documenting and writing out that stuff. Like, how did we decide what we were going to do and not do? What were our whys behind that? How did we lay that out and how did we communicate it? So just a couple lenses as you think beyond COVID life, because there is life beyond this. I don't know when beyond is, but there is life. Cassie and Dan, other things that you kind of want to share. We've got about just a couple minutes here to wrap up, but things that kind of been on your mind and your heart as a minister of the gospel that you want to share.
I feel like, I don't know if this is what you were trying to open it up for me to say, but so that's dangerous.
You can say anything you want.
I feel like I've been thinking a lot lately and learning a lot lately about how even within a family, people have different attitudes towards what's safe and what's restrictive and what's frustrating and what's worthwhile. And so I've learned, like literally in the last 8 days, just from talking to different members, the caring thing as a family member is to go with the most conservative approach in the family, because otherwise you are at each other's necks and creating fights when it's already hard. And that doesn't mean our goal is to avoid conflict, but it's just the most caring approach. And so I've been thinking, how do we apply that to church, but not just close or shut down, because I've been thinking since the beginning of this, when I was not super like, yeah, we can't have worship in person right away, and like looked back and was a little ashamed, like, why wasn't I on the forefront of that? Jesus always stood up for the undervalued people. And so that's why I was ashamed that when we very first had conversations about like, can we have worship this Sunday? I was like, of course we can. No, we didn't that Sunday, and we shouldn't have. And it wouldn't have been caring to the elderly in my congregation and to the medically fragile. Well, that's not the example that Jesus sets. So I've just been thinking about those pieces and how they go together. And that's what I'm like personally learning right now in my faith life is, how can I as a leader help parents and families as they make those decisions? Because I'm learning about how many families are warring within the family of like, well, this is ridiculous. Well, you made this choice and now I have to live in the basement. I didn't realize that until a week and a half ago. So I'm learning a lot about that right now. And I think it has bigger implications, and I don't know what all they are yet.
Thanks. Dan.
I guess my just big takeaway right now is a fresh recognition that we have to be attentive to, how does our mission intersect with our context, which is what it's supposed to be all along. But now our context is shouting in our face. And so we have to be aware of that. And that's allowed us to look at our mission to say, oh, well, what are we trying to do? And how does that fit with where our people are? And so it sounds obvious, but how does our mission fit our context? We can't not answer that right now. And let's continue wrestling with that beyond this crisis.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. A couple more things just as we wrap up. One, things like my slides, we'll have those available on the Church NeXt churchnext.online, which is just really a depository for lots of different things that you can find, different resources. And I would just kind of call out some stuff that's on there that might be helpful. There are some decision-making kind of processes on there that you can grab and just use with your staff or your leaders to kind of walk through some of those choices. There's also how to have better virtual meetings. You really actually can have better virtual meetings than you're probably having now. So some things like that on there. There's also some great tech stuff on there. Choosing cameras, if you're looking at like some streaming options, looking at lighting, looking at audio and how to do that kind of piece. There's tons of stuff on there that might be helpful to you. And also would shout out some websites or some Facebook sites that I think have got some great conversation happening right now. There's one called Lutheran Communicators that I've found really helpful. Lots of good discussion on there. Seth Hintz and a few other folks that are kind of moderating that piece. Wally, which is the worship arts kind of community of folks, a lot of musicians on there, some great stuff on their Facebook page where people are sharing and asking questions and getting solid answers. And there's also one that I believe is called Church Next. That's a lot of kind of tech leaders and folks that are trying to figure those things out. So tons of that stuff, you guys, that's out there. I know we're probably a lot of us getting like overwhelmed with so much content and so many possibilities. Really, again, if I could say one thing to you, I would just say, what are your priorities? What matters? What do your people need? And then how are you listening to where people are at? How are you listening to where they're at and loving them the best you can? And Cassie, to your point about how caring for people and who's the most conservative person in the family, I think I probably come at it from a different angle even than that. And my something I've been thinking about a lot, and that I think we have to wrestle with as a church, capital C, is what does it mean to make choices that are the choice that I want to make or that my family chooses to make, while at the same time not telling everybody else what decision they have to make in order to be a good person. I think that's a real challenge, and I think we're going to be facing that for a while, church. And so let's do our best to pray for each other and love each other in that. So thank you guys for being here. Let us know if you've got questions. Please feel free to reach out to any of the three of us, and we'll do our best to get back to you. God's blessings.